get to some of the big global headlines this morning with respect to President Trump, Ethiopia Central Bank Governor resigning, and also Apple looking to set a new AI-backed web tool. We'll begin with U.S. President Trump, who wants an expedited review of his tariffs by the Supreme Court. This, of course, following a setback last week for the Trump administration with the U.S. Court of Appeals deeming majority of those tariffs illegal. And that, of course, on the back of the U.S. Court of International Trade, which is what the appeals court was responding to. So we'll kick off there. Efosa Aluyi is joining us, co-managing partner at Aztran Global Investment. Efosa, good to see you again. You're welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm dying to get your thoughts on what's been happening with tariffs and so on. But what do you make of president wanting to get this expedited by the Supreme Court?
Well, so typically if he doesn't, the Supreme Court will probably be hearing this at the earliest, say, summer next year. And that essentially upends all of his old tariff arrangement. Now, what the appeal court, what they've done is to give up until, I think, October the 14th for the Supreme Court to hear it. But this is, clearly some, legal stuff that's going on here. So what the Trump administration has exploited to levy those tariffs are the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, enacted in 1977. It gives the president sweeping powers to, carry out, economic policies that basically border around, sanctions on enemies, freezing of assets, where the U.S. really is deemed to be under some kind of national security threat. So the argument really is that there isn't any security threat. There isn't any economic threat. So using that act as, leverage or excuse, if you will, is illegal. That's the argument really at the end of the day.
You have some quotes from Jeffrey Schwab, who is the senior counsel representing the businesses and some of the, I guess, democratic states that brought these cases to court. He responded saying that, well, we acknowledge that the government is now trying to get this expedited, but we do believe that the Supreme Court will rule in our favor. I know you're not a lawyer, and you are the executive in the financial sector, but I also entertain your speculation. Do you think the Supreme Court, how do you think they're likely to rule?
So if you look at the Supreme Court, it obviously leans conservative.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of the rulings that they've had during this Trump administration, they've all been positive.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, you really can't rule out the politics of it. However, if you look at the law, the letter of the law for this, then you'd expect that the Supreme Court would actually go with the lower courts, because the power for imposing tariffs really actually rests with the legislative arm of government, right? So these tariffs were imposed with executive orders, taking advantage of that IEEPA Act, however, just looking at how the Supreme Court has behaved over the last couple of months, particularly with stuff relating to Trump, I would not be surprised if they rule in favor of, the tariff. And this just really brings about another scepter of uncertainty. So if they actually rule in favor of the lower courts, what then happens to the whole tariff situation? I mean, I understand that the Trump administration most certainly wants to explore other loopholes to keep the tariffs running, but then it creates further uncertainty for markets. And markets just don't like that uncertainty situation.
Yeah. Speaking of markets, let's get to Ethiopia here. Mihretu, who has announced his resignation, posted a letter on Mamo Mihretu, posted a letter on X yesterday. I did want to get your thoughts, since you ended on the point of markets and how they view things. How investors like yourself have viewed the reforms by this particular central bank governor of Ethiopia, or the National Economic Bank, Bank of Ethiopia. Well, what's your take on his tenure?
Well, so first of all, I think his resignation was really surprising. Came in abruptly. But I think his tenure has marked some of the deepest reforms that we've seen in Ethiopia in probably 50 years, right? Very, very bold, very ambitious. Part of what he's done basically in his 32-month tenure is to liberalize the FX market, where the just like what we had in Nigeria essentially, right? Where the spreads between the parallel and the official market significantly narrowed. We've also seen those reforms essentially double reserves, right, within the period that he was in power. Those reforms have also, opened, unlocked funding in excess of $10 billion from the IMF, from the World Bank, and other lenders. It's also increased, financial market, financial sector assets, and it's also increased digital payments as well. So the reforms have been very, very far-reaching. They've been very, very strong. And if you look at his background, really isn't surprising. I mean, he used to head the Ethiopian Investment Holdings Company. This was a company that was managing Ethiopian Airlines, for instance. So again, and we see how that airline has performed, So it really isn't surprising. But I think it's just really surprising that he's decided to leave when he has left. They haven't announced a replacement yet. It really remains to be seen who that is. But I think whoever replacement is will certainly do well to consolidate on the gains or on the reforms that he's made. He's really pushed for legislation for the NBE, that's the National Bank of Ethiopia, to be more independent as well. So quite some really strong reforms that he's implemented, actually. Yeah,
central bank independence is another theme from the U.S. But looking at if Nigeria, Ethiopia, Argentina, and the different reforms that are taking place in each of these countries, what's the lesson learned? What's the takeaway from what we've seen across these countries?
I think a major thing is that reform isn't easy. Sometimes reform creates initial difficulties.
Yeah.
If you look at Argentina in the wake of its reforms, inflation tore through the roof. But now inflation has started to sort of cool off and calm down as well. And if you look at Nigeria, kind of similar path, if you will, or trajectory. The price situation has improved somewhat.
Yeah.
Same thing with Argentina as well. So I think reforms are not easy. You've got to be bold to carry them out. But I think they become really necessary in situations like this. Else, the situation just continues to get really, really terrible and bad.
Yeah. Let's run off with technology. So there's always a tech story every single day. Apple, and this, I guess, Bloomberg reporting that they are planning to overhaul Siri. They want this AI-backed web tool to compete with the OpenAIs and Perplexity of the world. Can Apple catch up on this AI side? How do you see this development?
I think they still can. I think the window for them to actually do something and start to catch up is probably 2 years. If within that period really nothing is moving, it becomes even more difficult for them to catch up. I think, and that continues to really concern and worry investors because there's not been any clarity in terms of an AI strategy from Apple, and that's not something they can do without. They're one of the major tech players, so obviously they've got to have a strategy around AI. And if you look at, it's only someone like AI tool, which is Siri. There's not been any upgrades to that quite a while. Yeah. And people are really concerned about that. Now, if you add on top of that, the fact that sometime this year, its design chief, Tony Ives, sold his nascent, AI company to OpenAI. Yeah. It just begins to tell you, okay, what exactly is Apple trying to do with regards to AI? And even his strategy really is to really partner with a lot of other AI providers. It's not really going deep into creating its own AI ecosystem, if you will. But I think that Apple still has some room to catch up. If you look at the company itself, it's succeeded in building very strong moats really around its products. Thrives off very strong user satisfaction, strong brand loyalty. The Apple ecosystem is there for it. And that is something that it should actually leverage on to actually push its AI strategy. So it really remains to be seen what this launch does next year. But I think that the window for Apple to try and really catch up is probably somewhere around 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. And very quickly, the ruling for Alphabet, for Google, court decided that, there was a monopoly with Chrome, but they don't have to sell it. And I think the judge also talked about how if they had stopped payments to Apple, that is for the deals that they have to have Chrome on there, that would have been disruptive. And I think both Alphabet stock and Apple stock rose. What was your take on that ruling there for Google? Or Alphabet, rather?
Yeah, Alphabet, it dodged the bullet, really.
Yeah.
So, and that's why you're seeing the stock reacting the way that it is reacting. Chrome is a very essential part of that business. Beyond what it does, the kind of data analytics that it provides for Google to be able to distribute and advertise really is invaluable. So if that had been taken away from them, that would have been a really, really serious dent. So the fact that it's not just tells you that they basically will live to fight another day.
Yeah. Efosa Aluyi, co-managing partner over at Aztran Global Investment. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.